Going live, going live, going live, going live. And we're live! And we're live. Don't sing. Oh, please don't. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Chapter 5 of our reading of The Hobbit. So what I had been doing in the past, these past couple episodes, what you've been noticing is I would read for 30 minutes straight, and then I would just cut it off. I'm going to keep something a little more coherent to the story. Oh yeah, and by the way, did you notice got a little work done? A little more golden topped, dough-headed, if that's the right word. And it's going to take a little getting used to for myself, but it's not going to last long. I'm getting rid of it. It's changing again tomorrow. This is just like a precursor. So back to the book. What I'm going to do from now on is I'm going to try and save it to one chapter per video. Now, since we had started the chapter 4, which is Overhill and Underhill, which is the dwarves and our gang and everybody being taken hostage by the goblins, and Gandalf is coming to their rescue. What I'm going to do, there's only about like a page and a half left of that, so I'm going to finish that up, and then I'm going to read all of chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. So thank you, everybody who's been tuning in. I hope you've been enjoying it. And if you know anything about Riddles in the Dark, that's probably one of the more famous literary chapters. It's up there. Pretty highly up there, I would imagine. So let's go ahead and finish up chapter 4. Alright. On they went. Gandalf was quite right. They began to hear goblin noises and horrible cries far beyond in the passage they had come through. That sent them on faster than ever, and as poor Bilbo could not possibly go half as fast, for dwarves can roll along at tremendous pace, I can tell you, when they have to. They took in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and these goblins knew the way better. They had made the paths themselves, and were madly angry, so that they do what they could. The dwarves heard the cries and howls getting closer and closer. Soon they could hear even the flap of the goblins' feet, many, many feet, which seemed only just round the last corner. The blink of red torches could be seen behind them in the tunnel they were following, and they were getting deadly tired. I don't know what a bink is. I figured that's probably a Tolkienism for something. Nope, I just read it wrong. Why, oh why did I ever leave my hobbit hole, said poor Mr. Baggins, bumping up and down on Bomber's back. Why, oh why did I ever bring a wretched little hobbit on a treasure hunt, said Bomber, who was fat, and staggered along with the sweat dripping down his nose in heat and terror. At this point, Gandalf fell behind, and Thorin with him. They turned a sharp corner. About turn, he shouted. Draw your sword, Thorin! There was nothing else that could be done, and the goblins did not like it. They came scurrying around the corner in full cry, and found Goblin Cleaver and Foe Hammer, shining cold and bright right in their astonished eyes. The ones in front dropped their torches and gave one yell before they were killed. The ones behind yelled still more and leaped back, knocking over those that were running after them. Bite her and beat her, they shrieked, as soon as they were all in confusion, as most of them were hustling back from the way they had come. It was quite a long while before any of them dared to turn that corner. By the time the dwarves had gone on again a long, long way into the dark tunnels of the goblins' realm. When the goblins discovered that they had put out their torches, and they had slipped on soft shoes, and they chose to put on their very quickest runners with the sharpest eyes and ears. These ran forward as swift as weasels in the dark, and with hardly any more noise than bats. That is why neither Bilbo, nor the dwarves, nor even Gandalf heard them coming, nor did they see them, but they were seen by the goblins that ran silently up behind before Gandalf was letting his wand give out a faint light to help the dwarves as they went along. But suddenly, Dory, now at the back again carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind in the dark. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on a hard rock, and remembered nothing more. Alright. Sucks to be Bilbo. Alright, Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just dark as them shut. None was anywhere near him. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except for the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and grouped around on all fours until he touched the walls of a tunnel, but neither nor up nor down could it be he found anything. Nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain, even in the direction they had been going when he fell. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of gold lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him more miserable. Now, you probably know what's coming up. And yeah, I'm going to try my best to channel Andy Serkis, because that's a very particular voice that everybody knows now. And really, if you'd ever seen the Rankin and Bass animated feature, that was actually really good. I could not reproduce that voice, but I can do this, that's easy. And that's actually pretty bad for an Andy Serkis. So, but you'll get the idea. Alright. He could not think what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a very long while. After some time he fell for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought out on the dark onto him in this horrible place. Still at the moment he felt very crushed. But in slapping all of his pockets and feeling all around himself for matches, his hand came to the hilt of his little sword, a little dagger that he got from the trolls, that he had quite forgotten, nor, fortunately, had the goblins noticed it, as he wore it inside of his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it was an elvish blade too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not very far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars, for which so many songs had sung, and he also had noticed that such weapons had made a great impression on goblins that they came back to them suddenly. Go back, he thought. Not good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward. Only thing to do. On we go. So he got up. He trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall in his heart, all of a pitter and patter. Now, currently Bilbo was in what was called a tight place, but you must remember it was not so tight for him as it would have been for you or me. Hobbits are not hoblets. What's a hoblet? Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, after all. If their holes are nice, cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins. Still, they are most used for tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground. nor when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily, and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. I should have not liked to have been in Mr. Baggins' place all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew was that he was still going down pretty steadily and kept in the same direction in despite of a twist and turn or two. There were passages leading off to every side every now and then, and he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or he could feel the hand on his wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past or fear for goblins, or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On and on he went, and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whirl of a bat by his ears, which startled him at first, till it became so frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on and on, until he tired and tireder. It seemed like that all the way to tomorrow, and it never until the days beyond. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water. Ugh, it was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear, when he listened, hard drip, drip, dripping drip from the unseen roof of the water below, but there seemed to be no other sound of sort. So it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, and he thought, too, of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes, wriggling in the water. These are strange livings in the pools and lakes in the hearts of mountains. Fish, whose fathers swam in, goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. There were other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves, the goblins had made themselves there, and other things, unbeknown to them, that they have sneaked in from outside to lie in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back to the beginnings, to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages, and the original owners still there in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down here in the dark, where water lived, old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes and his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out for his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with long fingers as quick as sticking. He liked meat, too. Goblin, he thought, good, when he could get it. But he took care that they never found out about him. He just throttled them from behind as if they ever came down anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. And they had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further. So there their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived in a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from the distance with his pale eyes, like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo. for he could see that he was not a goblin at all. Gollum got in his boat, shot off the island while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether flummoxed, and at the end of his way and his wits, suddenly up came Gollum and whispered and hissed.
Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At some a tasty morsel. It's make us Gollum.
And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat that made him how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when his hiss came to his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him.
What is he, my precious?
Whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, though never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise he would have grabbed first and whispered after. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know, if only I can get away.
What's he got in his hands?
Said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. A sword, a blade, which came out of Gondolin.
Said Gollum, and became quite polite. Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles? Perhaps it does. Does it? Does it?
He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the hobbit, and he was quite alone, really, whether he was good to eat, or whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them, and sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all of his friends and he was driven away, alone, and crept down into the dark under the mountain. Very well, said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed.
What has roots, as nobody sees, is taller than trees. Up, up it goes, and yet never grows.
Easy, said Bilbo. A mountain, I suppose.
Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, what does it want, say? What shows it the way out, yes?
All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. An idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather on the old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do.
Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teeth, teeth, my precious. It was only we have 6.
Then he asked his second.
Voiceless, it cries, witlingless, wingless flutters, toothless bits, mouthless mutters.
Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had heard something rather like this before and was getting his wits back. He thought of the answer. Wind! Wind, of course, he said, and that he was so pleased he made up one on the spot. This puzzles a nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like this eye, said the first eye, now in low place, not in high place. Said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time and was forgetting this sort of thing, but just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole by a bank in the river.
My precious. Sun on the daisy, it means it does.
But these ordinary, above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him, as he reminded him of days when he was less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more is they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant.
It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life and kills laughter.
Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all around him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. He asked to gain time until he could think of a really hard one. This, he thought, was dreadfully easy, Chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words, provided a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself and did not answer. He whispered and sputtered. After some time, Bilbo became impatient. "Well, what is it?" he said. "The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think for the noise you are making."
Give us a chance, my precious."
"Well," said Bilbo, after giving him a long chance, "what are your guesses?" But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago and sitting under a riverbank teaching his grandmother to suck.
"Eggs," he hissed. "Eggs it is."
And then he asked,
"Alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in the mail, never clinking."
That voice takes a toll. He also had in his turn thought that this was dreadfully easy one because he was always thinking of an answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course. Or could. Or can guess it as easily as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not had the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice. No answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself.
"Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable?"
He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. "Half a moment," said the hobbit, shivering. "I gave you a good long chance just now."
"It must make haste, said Gollum,
beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell at Bilbo's toes. "Ugh! It's cold and clammy," he guessed. "Fish! Fish!" he cried. "It is a fish!" Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quickly as he ever could, so that Gollum had to get back in his boat to think. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near 3 legs. 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing it if he had another time. It was talking a fish, no legs, which was not very difficult. And after the rest of the way, fish on a little table, man at table sitting at a stool, the cat has the bones. That, of course, is the answer. And soon Gollum gave it. Then he thought a time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said.
"This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins towns, and beats high mountains down.
Poor Bilbo sat in the dark, thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told in his tales, but not one of them had done all those things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different that he thought he ought to know, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and then it was bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped onto the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see in his eyes coming for him. His tongue seemed to stick out of his mouth. He wanted to give a shout, "Give me more time! Give me more time!" But all that came out was a sudden squeal. "Time! Time!" Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry and tired of the game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back to the boat. He sat down in the dark next to Bilbo. That made the Hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable and scattered his wits.
"It's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes," said Gollum.
But Bilbo simply could not think of any question without that nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him and pawing and poking him. He scratched himself and he pinched himself best he could think of anything.
Ask us, says Gollum.
Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword and even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten all about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was the riddle, and he was frightfully upset.
Not fair, he hissed. "It isn't fair, my precious, it is, to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pockets."
Bilbo, seeing that what had happened, having nothing better to stick to but he stuck to the question. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said louder.
"Yes," said Gollum. "It must give us 3 guesses, my precious, 3 guesses."
"Very well, guess away," said Bilbo.
"Hanses," said Bilbo.
"Wrong," said Bilbo, who luckily just taken his hand out again. "Guess again."
Said Gollum, more upset than ever.
He thought all of the things he keeps in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblin's teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think of what other people keep in their pockets.
"A knife,"
he said at last. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. "Last guess." Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him his egg question. He hissed and spluttered and rocked himself back and forward and slapped his feet on the floor and wriggled and squirmed, but still did not care to waste his last guess. "Come on," said Bilbo. "I am waiting." He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel all sure how the game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. "Time's up," he said.
"String or nothing!"
shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in 2 guesses at once. "Both wrong!" cried Bilbo, much relieved, and he jumped at his feet at once and put his back to the nearest wall, held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred, an immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust his slimy thing to keep his promise at a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it. And after all, that last question had not been generally riddle-worthy, although it was to the ancient laws. But at any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last Bilbo could wait no longer. "Well," he said, "what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way."
"Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little Baggins the way out, yes. But what has it got in its pockets, eh? Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh no, Gollum.
Never you mind, said Bilbo. A promise is a promise.
Cross it is, impatient, precious,
hissed Gollum.
But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, things to help us.
Well, hurry up, said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just going to make an excuse and did not mean to come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out in the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserably wicked creature, and already he had a plan. Not far away was his island, which Bilbo knew nothing, and there was his hiding place. He kept a few retro ornaments, and one very beautiful thing, a very beautiful, very wonderful thing. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring.
My birthday present,
he whispered to himself, as he often does in the endless dark days. That wasn't much of a whisper.
That's what we want now. Yes, we want it.
He wanted it because it was a ring of power, and if you slipped that ring on your finger, you became invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint.
My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious.
So he had always said to himself. But who knows how Gollum came to that present ages ago, in the old days when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first. It tried until it tired him, and then he kept it in his pouch next to his skin until it galled him. And now he usually hid it in a hole in the rock on his island, and was always going back to look at it. And still sometimes he put it on when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or when he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. Then he would creep along dark passages looking for stray goblins. He might even venture into places where torches were lit and made his eyes blink and smart, for he would be safe. Oh yes, quite safe. No one would see him, no one would notice him, until he had his fingers on their throat. Only a few hours ago he had worn it, and caught a small goblin imp. How it squeaked. He still had a bone or two left to gnaw, but he wanted something softer.
Quite safe, yes, he whispered to himself. It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us. And its nasty little swords, it will be useless. Yes, quite.
That is what was in his wicked little mind when he slipped away from Bilbo's side and flapped back to his boat and went into the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him. When he waited a little while, he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly, he heard a screech. It sent a shiver down his back. Gollum was cursing and wailing away in the gloom, not far off from the sound of it. He had been on his island, scrambling here and there, searching and seeking in vain.
Where is it? Where is it?
Bilbo heard him crying.
Lost it! My precious, lost, lost! Curse us and crush us, my precious is lost.
What's the matter? Bilbo called. What have you lost?
It mustn't ask us, shrieked Gollum. Not its business. No, Gollum. It's lost, Gollum. Gollum. Gollum.
Well, so am I, cried Bilbo, and I want to get unlost, and I won the game as you promised. So come along. Come and let me out, and then go on with your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted so much could hardly be worth something good. Come along, he shouted.
No, not yet, precious. We must search for it. It's lost, Gollum.
But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo.
Never guessed,
said Gollum. Then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss.
What has it got in its pockets? Tell us that. It must tell first.
As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell. Gollum's mind had jumped to a guess quicker than his. Naturally, that Gollum had brooded for ages on this one thing, and he was always afraid of it being stolen. But Bilbo was annoyed at the delay. After all, he had won the game pretty fairly at a horrible risk. Answers were to be given. Guessed, not given, he said.
But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum. Not a riddle, precious, no.
Oh well, if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo replied. Then I asked one first. What have you lost? Tell me that.
What has it got in its pockets?
The sound came hissing louder and sharper. As he looked towards it, to his alarm, Bilbo was now 2 small points of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burned with a pale flame. What have you lost? Bilbo persisted. By now the light in Gollum's eye had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was on his boat again, paddling quickly back to the dark shore. In such a rage of loss and suspicion was in his heart that no sword could have any more terror for him. Bilbo could not guess what had maddened the wretched little creature, but he saw what was up, and that Gollum went to murder him at any rate. Just in time, he turned and ran blindly back into the dark passage which they had just come down from.
What has it got in its pockets?
He heard the hiss loud behind him, and the splash of Gollum leapt from his boat. What have I wonder, he said to himself as he panted and stumbled along. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold. It was quietly slipped onto his groping finger. The hissing was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag on the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. In a moment, Gollum was on him, but before Bilbo could do anything, recover his breath, pick himself up, or wave his sword, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him and cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light of his eyes palely shining even from behind. Painfully he got up and sheathed his sword, which was now glowing faintly. Then very cautiously he followed. There he seemed nothing else to do. It was no good crawling back down to Gollum's water. Perhaps if he followed him, Gollum might even lead him to some sort of escape without meaning to.
Curse it! Curse it! Curse it!
Hissed Gollum.
Curse the Baggins! It's done! What has it got in its pockets? Oh, we guess, my precious. He's found it, yes, he must have. My birthday present.
Bilbo picked up his ears as he was beginning to guess himself. He hurried a little, getting as close as he dared behind Gollum, who was still going quickly, not looking back, and turning his head from one side to the other side, and Bilbo could see from the faint glimmer on the walls.
My birthday present, curse it! How did we lose it, my precious? Yes, that's it. When we came this way last, when we twisted that nasty young squeaker, that's it. Curse it! He slipped from us. After all the ages and ages, it's gone, Gollum.
Suddenly Gollum sat down and began to weep, a whistling and gurgling sound horrible to listen to. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the tunnel wall. After a while, Gollum stopped weeping and began to talk. He seemed to have an argument with himself. It's no good going back there to search, no. We doesn't remember all the places we visited. It's no use. The Baggins has got it in his pockets. The nasty noser has found it, we says. We guesses, precious, only guesses. We cannot know till we find the nasty creature and squeeze it. But it doesn't know what the present can do now, does it? It just keeps it in its pockets. It doesn't know how far it can go. It lost itself, the nasty, noisy thing. It doesn't know the way out. It said so. It said so, yes. But it's tricksy.
It doesn't say what it means. It won't say what it's got in its pockets, of course. It knows a way in. It must know a way out, yes. It's off to the back door. To the back door, that's it. The goblins will catch it then. It can't get out that way, precious. Goblins is... Yes, but if it got the present, our precious present, then goblins will get it. Gollum, they will find it. They will find out what it does. We shan't ever be safe again. Never, Gollum. One of the goblins will put it on, and then no one will see him. We'll be there, but not seen. Even our clever eyes will notice him, and he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us, Gollum. Gollum. Then let's stop talking, precious, and make haste. If Baggins has gone that way, we must go quick and see. Go! Not far now, make haste.
I don't remember Andy Serkis having that many lines before. With a spring, Gollum got up and started shambling off with a great pace. Bilbo hurried after him, still cautiously, though his chief fear now was tripping on another snag and falling on his nose. His head was in a whirl of hope and wonder. It seemed that the ring he had was a magic ring. It made you invisible. He had heard of such things, of course, in old tales, but it was hard to believe that he really had found one by accident. Still, there it was. Gollum with his bright eyes had passed him, only a yard to one side. On they went, Gollum flip-flapping ahead, hissing and cursing, Bilbo behind, going as softly as a hobbit can. Soon he came to places where, as Bilbo had noticed on the way down, side passages opened this way and that. Gollum began at once to count them. 1 left, yes. 1 right, yes. 2 right, yes, yes. 2 left, yes, yes. And so on, and so on. As the count grew, he slowed down and began to get shaky and weepy, for he was leaving the water further and further behind, and he was getting afraid. Goblins might be about, and he had lost his ring. At last he stopped by a low opening and left as they went up. 7 right, yes. 6 left, yes, he whispered. This is it. This is the way to the back door, yes. Here's the passage. He peered in and shrank back. But we daren't go, precious. No, we daren't. Goblins down there. Lots of goblins. We smell them, yes. What shall we do? Curse them and curse them. We must wait here, precious. Wait a bit and see. So they came to a dead stop. Gollum had brought Bilbo all the way out after all, but Bilbo could not get in. There was Gollum sitting humped in the opening, and his eyes gleamed cold in his head, and he swayed from left to right between his knees. Bilbo crept away from the wall, moving quietly than a mouse. But Gollum sniffed at once and sniffled, and his eyes went green. He hissed softly and menacingly. He could not see the hobbit, but now he was on alert, and he had other senses that the darkness had sharpened, hearing and smell. He seemed to be crouched right down with his flat hands sprayed on the floor and his head thrust back, nose almost to the stone. Though he was only a black shadow in the gleam with his own eyes, Bilbo could see or feel that he was tense as a bowstring gathered for a spring. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was so desperate. He must get away out of this horrible darkness while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out and kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him or tried to yet. And he was miserable, alone, and lost. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of ending unmarked days without light or hope or betterment. Hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. All these thoughts passed in a flash of a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly, in another flash, as if lifted as a new strength of resolve, he leapt. No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight all over Gollum's head, he jumped 7 feet forward and 3 in the air. Indeed, had he known it, he had only missed cracking his skull on the low arch of a passage. Gollum threw himself backwards and grabbed as the hobbit flew over him, but it was too late. His hand snapped on the thin air, and Bilbo, falling far on his sturdy feet, sped off down the new tunnel. He did not turn to see what Gollum was doing. There was hissing and cursing almost at his heels at first. Then it stopped. All at once there came a blood-curdling shriek, filled with hatred and despair. Gollum was defeated. He dared go no further. He had lost his prey, and lost, too, the only thing that he ever cared for, his precious. The cry brought Bilbo's heart to his mouth, but he still held on. Now faint as an echo, but menacing, the voice called out behind him.
Thief! Thief! Thief, Baggins! We hates it! We hates it! We hates it forever!
Then there was silence, but that too seemed menacing to Bilbo. If goblins are so near that he had smelt them, he thought, then they would have heard his shrieking and cursing. Careful now, or this way would lead you to worse things. The passage was low and roughly made. It was not too difficult for a hobbit, except for when, in spite of all care, he stubbed his poor toes again several times on nasty, jagged stones on the floor. A bit low for goblins, at least, for the big ones, he thought, not knowing that even big ones, the orcs of the mountain, go along great speed, stooping low with their heads almost on the ground. Soon the passage had been sloped down, began to go up again, and after a while climbed steeply. That slowed Bilbo down, but at last the slope stopped, and passage turned a corner, and dipped down again, and there, at the bottom of a short incline, he saw, flittering round another corner, a glimpse of light. Not red light, as of fire or lantern, but pale, out-of-doors sort of light. Then Bilbo began to run. Scuttling as far as his legs would carry him, he turned down the last corner and suddenly came right into an open space where the light, after all that time in the dark, seemed dazingly bright. Really, it was only a leak of sunshine through the doorway, where a great door, a stone door, was left standing open. Bilbo blinked, and then suddenly he saw the goblins. Goblins in full armor, with drawn swords, sitting just inside the door and watching it with wide eyes, and watching the passage that led to it. There they were aroused, alert, ready for anything. They saw him sooner than he had saw them, yet they saw him. Yes, they saw him. Whether it was accident or last trick of the ring before it took on a new master, it was not on his finger. With yells of delight, the goblins rushed upon him. A passive fear of loss, like the echo of Gollum's misery, smote Bilbo, and forgetting even to draw his sword, he struck his hands in his pocket. There was the ring, still, in his left pocket. It slipped onto his finger. The goblins stopped short. They could not see a sign of him. He had vanished. They yelled twice as loud as before, but not so delightedly. "Where is it?" they cried. "Go back up the passage," some shouted. "This way," some yelled. "That way," others yelled. "Look out for the door," bellowed the captain. Whistles blew, armors clashed, swords rattled, goblins cursed and swore and ran hither and thither, falling over one another and getting very angry. There was a terrible outcry to do and disturbance. Bilbo was dreadfully frightened, but he had sense to understand what was happening and to sneak behind a big barrel, which was held drink for the goblin guards, and so to get out of the way and avoid being bumped into, trampled to death, or caught by a feel. "I must get to the door. I must get to the door," he kept on saying to himself. But it was a long time before he ventured to try. Then it was like a horrible game of blind man's bluff. The place was full of goblins running about, and the poor little hobbit dodged this way and that, was knocked over by a goblin who could not make out what he had bumped into, scrambled on all fours, slipped away between the legs of the captain just in time, got up, and ran for the door. It was still ajar, but a goblin had pushed it nearly to. Bilbo struggled as he could not move it. He tried to squeeze through the crack. He squeezed and squeezed and stuck. It was awful. His buttons got wedged on the edge of the door and doorposts. He could see outside the door in the open air. There were a few steps remaining down into the narrow valley between the mountains. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone bright on the outside of the door, but he could not get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins inside shouted, "There's a shadow by the door. Something is outside." Bilbo's heart jumped into his mouth. He gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions. He was through a torn coat and waistcoat, leaping down the steps like a goat, where bewildered goblins still picked up his nice brass buttons at the doorstep. Of course, they came down after him, hootering and hollering and hunting among the trees, but they don't like the sun, and it made their eggs wobble and their heads giddy. They could not find Bilbo with the ring on, slipping in and out of the shadow of the trees, running quick and quiet, and keeping out of the sun. Soon they went back grumbling and cursing to guard the door. Bilbo had escaped. Woo! Alright. Hey, thanks for the likes, guys. That is going to do it for Chapter 5. Next chapter, Chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. We will pick that again up probably tomorrow night. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. How you like the hair? This is the likes for the new hair. Fun read. You can tell my voice can't handle much more Gollum. So I'm thankful he's done with the book. We don't hear from Gollum again for like another 20 literary years later. So guys, again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm enjoying it. We're going to keep on going. We got 25 more chapters to go. We'll see. We'll stick to it.